especially again thank the girls' chorus for singing today. Thanks for sharing your gifts with us here at the church. And Brad, thank you for doing a fantastic job of putting all that together. We're really glad that you're here today. For just a few moments, I want us to look over a little story that Jesus told many, many years ago. It's a story that I hope will inspire you, just as it has done for me. Because I have a feeling that some of you are a little bit like me in some of this. You probably find it difficult to pray for something for very long without seeing it happen. Now, it may be just due to my phlegmatic nature. I find it a little bit difficult to get extremely serious about too much of anything because that would be a lot of work. Phlegmatics just kind of don't do a lot of that. But I have a feeling that it's deeper than that because some of you don't have a lot of phlegmatic in your personality. And yet you find it difficult to camp out on something and pray until you see it happen. And the story we're going to look at today is dealing with this very issue. It's one that I believe many of us deal with, and I hope today that we will see it a little bit differently than we have before. My Bible is open to Luke, the Gospel of Luke, the 18th chapter. Luke is writing down one of the stories that Jesus told. Luke is a physician, and he has written down a collection of things about Jesus in an ancient manuscript that we have in our Bibles today called the Gospel according to Luke, or the Gospel of Luke. Basically just means this is what Luke wrote down about Jesus and the things that he said and the things that he did. And Luke spent a lot of time researching this. He spent a lot of time looking into Jesus' life, talking to eyewitnesses of people who were there, who heard him, who saw him, who watched him say these things. And he wrote all this stuff down. And one of those things that he wrote down we're going to look at today. It's found in Luke the 18th chapter. And I will begin reading in verse 2. And I'll be reading from the New King James Version today for our time. This is what Jesus said. There was in a certain city a judge who did not fear God nor regard man. Now there was a widow in that city, and she came to him saying, "Get justice for me from my adversary." And he would not for a while. But afterward he said within himself, "Though I do not fear God nor regard man, yet, because this widow troubles me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she," and what does your Bible say? Weary me, or wear me out. Right? Now, what I hope you will see today is that this is very different than, say, when your children would come to you day after day and ask for the same thing, and you finally just got tired of it and caved in. Right? This is not what I'm trying to present to you today. This is not a spoiled person trying to get their way. This is a lady. I can't say too much about that because we're going to come to it in a moment. Let's look through some of the pieces of this story together for just a moment and get a little bit more of what's really going on here. In verse 2, we find that there is a judge, and there's two things that we need to know about him. The first thing is that he does not fear God. Now, if a person doesn't fear God, generally, what does that mean about the person? If they don't have any fear of God in front of them, they don't really feel like God exists, how does that influence the decisions that they make? Okay, well, let's back into that just a little bit differently then. If a person has no fear of God in front of them, they don't really care about what God thinks or about what God may do at the end of time or what God may think about something. then they're going to do whatever they feel like, and they don't really care how it affects anyone because all they look out for is... Exactly. So see, you all knew that. So this is a person who doesn't really care about what God thinks. He only cares about what he thinks. And he's not worried about the end of his life showing up and God saying, oh, okay, now wait a second. Do you remember this person and this person and this person when you made a decision that was not right? He's not worried about that at all. So there's no constraints on his morals. How would you like to have a judge like that? Now, the second thing that we find out about him, he doesn't fear God, but what's the second thing in the story? Some of your Bibles will say he doesn't regard man, or he doesn't care about what other people think of him, nor does he really care much about them, period. So there's two things. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I think that some of you may have a small place in you that actually does care about how people perceive you. You actually care about what people think of the decisions that you make. Now, if you care too much, you'll probably never make any decisions that are controversial. But we all have this little place, some of it's a little bit larger, we actually do care about what people think. He didn't care at all. He didn't care what people thought about the judgments that he made. And he really didn't care about people very much. So now into this story comes a widow. Now, in the first century, widows didn't have very many rights. There weren't people really to plead their case and to look after them a whole lot. And so she has a situation where she's been wrong. We don't know what it is. Jesus doesn't feel it's important to tell us in the story. But she obviously has a situation where something wrong happened to her and nobody's doing anything about it. Have you ever been there? No one in the church. Wow. You've never had one honest soul. Okay. One, two of you have had something go wrong and you want to get some justice and it's not happening. We've all been there. I was there in grade school. I remember it well. I've not forgotten it. She comes to the person who can do something about her problem. And what does he do? According to what Luke wrote down, Jesus says about the story. What does he do? In a word, nothing. He does nothing. Why? The text tells us why. Because he does not fear God and he doesn't care what people think. And that's plain and simple. This lady's a bother. He doesn't care about her situation. He's not interested in it. And so he does nothing. What would you do if you were that lady? Now, I'm not going to ask again for a show of hands. This could be embarrassing. How many of you, just think to yourself, how many of you would have just given up? Yeah, no show of hands. How many of you would have just said, okay, whatever, I'm just going to have to deal with this, I guess? Now, how many of you, again, no show of hands, would have done what this lady does? Listen to the text again. Verse 3. Now there was a widow in that city, and she came to him, saying, "Get justice for me from my adversary." Verse 5. This widow, he says to himself, continues to trouble me. What do we know about this lady?
Persistent.
She is persistent. She doesn't give up. She keeps coming back, and she keeps saying the same thing over and over, because this is the right person to take care of the problem. And she goes right to the source again and and again and again. Now let me ask you a question. How much do you think that she has been gripped by whatever it is that took place? To keep coming back over and over again. She's been gripped by it a lot. This is something that matters so much to her that she's not going to take no for an answer. And she's not worried about how long it takes. She's going to keep after it again and again and again. Now, the way Jesus tells this story is actually quite humorous. In the original language, the idea behind verse 5. When the judge finally gives in and he says, though I do not fear God nor regard man, now verse 5, yet because this widow troubles me, I will avenge her, and here's the phrase, lest by her continual coming she weary me. In the original language, the idea behind that idea of continually wearying me is that she will come and give me a black eye. She's going to come and slap me in the face one of these. She's serious. And this guy is just finally saying, I don't care about her situation. I don't even care about her. I don't care what God thinks. I don't even know if he exists. But man, this lady is serious. And one of these days, she's going to get serious enough. She's just going to walk in here and slap me a good one, and it's not going to be pleasant. I'm just going to get this over with. Okay, I'll take care of it. So the story ends. Now, Jesus has a perspective on this story. Do you think the point of the story is that God doesn't really care and he just needs you to keep battering down his door until he gets tired of hearing from you? No. Okay, good. I'm glad you're not there. Let's go to what Jesus says about the story, verse 6. Then the Lord said, Jesus is commenting on the story that he's just told. Hear what the unjust judge said. He's interacting with the disciples and his audience. And he says, basically, did you catch it? Did you just hear what took place? Did you get the idea behind this story? That's what Jesus is saying in verse 6. Did you hear what happened? How this lady was persistent and persistent and persistent. And even though the guy doesn't care 2 cents for her or what's going on in her life, that persistence paid off, and he finally says, okay, enough, I'll take care of you. Did you get that? Jesus is saying to his audience. And then he goes on, verse 7. And shall not God avenge his own elect who cry out day and night to him, though he bears long with them? If a guy who doesn't care what God thinks, and if a guy who doesn't care what people think about him or doesn't care about people in general, if he would be willing to do this, how much more the God who does care about what you and I experience in life? Amen. This is not saying God doesn't care and you just better keep pestering him so that finally he'll get tired of you and say, fine, I'll take care of you and move on to somebody else. Jesus is trying to say, if a guy who doesn't care 2 cents would do this for this lady, how much more the God who does care? How much more will he answer your prayer? Verse 8. I tell you, Jesus speaking again, I tell you that he will avenge them speedily. And then a phrase that really strikes us if we think about it. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man returns, and here's the question, will he find, and what's your Bible say? Faith in the earth. So Jesus kind of backs out of the story quickly, and he takes people down to the end of time. And he says, when I come back, you know what I'm going to be looking for? I'm going to be looking for people who believe enough to not give up. I'm going to be looking for people who believe that God cares enough that they are going to persist until they see it happen. The people who have faith enough to not stop asking God for the thing that grips their hearts even though they haven't seen it happen yet. That's what I'm going to look for when I come back. People who believe enough to not give up. Now, why did Jesus tell this story? I didn't read this verse to you. If you're in Luke 18 in the Bible there, I want you to look at verse 1 and just read through it really quickly. Luke chapter 18, verse 1. Why did Luke believe that Jesus told this story? Luke says, and I'm hearing some of you say it right now, that Jesus told this story to his disciples to help them get the idea that they should pray and never give up. The New Living Translation is actually how it puts it. Some of you in King James may have pray and not lose heart. Have you ever lost heart about something? You ever wanted something really bad and you got tired of wanting it and waiting for it? And so you lost heart and you gave up. How did that feel? It doesn't feel good, does it? It's actually painful. Something that you wanted and it gripped you. And you waited. And finally you got tired of waiting and you gave up. And you just kind of retreated and it felt like a crushing thing. Luke says that Jesus told this story for one reason. To encourage people to pray and never give up. Now, why would Jesus encourage people to do something if he didn't believe that God cared enough to answer? And if there's anybody that knows God's heart, I'll take Jesus' word for it. Persistence. You remember a story in the book of Genesis, the story of Jacob. You remember Jacob was about to meet his brother, the brother that wanted to kill him because of some things that had happened when they were younger. And he was about to meet his brother, and Jacob goes across this little stream one evening to pray and try and get his thoughts together. And you remember what happens, right? Jacob is confronted by a person, and it's in the middle of the night, it's dark, and he can't really see much. And this person starts to wrestle with him, and what would you do if you were Jacob? You would do exactly what he did. You wrestle with this person for your life because you don't know what's going to happen. And the text says that Jacob wrestles with this person all night long, and finally the person says, "Let me go." And Jacob has a sense that this is not just a bandit trying to steal his purse or his wallet. He's wrestling with someone who's up the food chain a long ways from him. He's wrestling with the angel of the Lord, and he says, "I will not let you go unless," you know the story, "unless you bless me." Isn't it interesting that the angel didn't say, "Excuse me, that's presumptuous. Why are you being so persistent? Can't you take no for an answer?" He actually commends Jacob for what he's doing. He says, "What's your name?" While they're struggling together. Jacob's hip is out of socket at this point in time. He's in excruciating pain, but he's not letting go. And the angel asks him, "What's your name?" And he says, "It's Jacob." And he says, "I'm going to change your name from the guy that means deceiver to Israel, the father of a nation. I'm going to change your name." And then he tells him, "I'm going to bless you because you didn't give up." Do you think persistence is important to God? I would say it is. Do you remember the story of Elijah? After the situation on Mount Carmel where he prays and God brings fire down from heaven and consumes this sacrifice in front of everybody. And they recognize, wow, God really is the real deal. And they're in a drought. Anybody relate to that? Anybody glad we had water to drink this morning? They're in a drought. And everybody thinks that Elijah's got something to do with this when it's actually their fault. And I'm not sure that our drought is necessarily the same category. Elijah goes up on top of Mount Carmel. And he kneels down and he puts his head face down to the earth. And guess what he does? You can guess what it's doing. Yeah, he prays, right? That's exactly what we should probably be doing right about now with the rain situation. He prays and he sends his servant up to the top, around the side of the mountain, and he says, I want you to go and see if you see anything. And the servant knows what he's looking for. What's he looking for? Something that we're looking for, right? He's looking for a cloud that's darker. One that can be carrying moisture. How many times did Elijah tell him to go? It wasn't once. It wasn't twice. And it wasn't just 3 times. He told him to go 7 times. Guess what Elijah's doing during that time? He's praying. He's not giving up. And guess what he sees, the servant sees at the end of the 7th time? There's a little cloud about the size of a man's hand out there on the horizon, and it's a little darker than all the rest of it. Elijah says to himself, I know exactly what that is. That's the answer. Let's go. Persistence. Here's why I think persistence is important. God could answer all of our prayers on the first time around. How many of us would love it if that were the case? We would be delighted, and we would come to take it for granted. Unless you invest your heart and soul in something, when it comes to you or when you receive it, it's not as valuable. The thing that grips you, the thing that just has to happen, the thing that gets right into your heart and burdens you and keeps you awake and makes you think about it, when you invest in that thing and when it's drawn out for a little while, when it finally happens, guess how you feel? Deep satisfaction and deep appreciation. And sometimes that's why, as parents, you didn't say yes immediately to everything, right? You wanted to actually see about this really. Is this something that's just going to come and go in a day, or is this something that they really are willing to camp out on? So some of you waited just a little while. Not because you weren't willing, but because you knew that the waiting would produce something in your kids that was beautiful. And I think it's really the same with God. There are times when He asks us to persist, not because He can't hear, not because He doesn't care, but because He knows what persistence will do in you. It changes us when we allow ourselves to be gripped by something that we desperately want to see happen. And the danger is that we would be unwilling to go there because we're afraid it won't happen. And we'll never try. Listen to this one. This is from a little book called Christ Object Lessons, page 175, and the author is Ellen White. Listen to what she wrote down. There is no danger that the Lord will neglect the prayers of His people. There is no danger that the Lord will neglect your prayers and mine. Here's the problem. The danger is that they will become discouraged and fail to persevere in their prayers. The danger is not that God doesn't care, not that he doesn't want to help you. The danger is that we will give up too soon and not be willing to invest our hearts and souls in the thing that we're praying for. So what if you stopped and given up? What if you quit praying for? I know some things. I'm sure you do. What if we really believed that God was doing something in that waiting time? What if we really believed that he was working out something in us? That he had every intention of seeking to answer that prayer? We'd pray and we wouldn't give up. We'd keep at it. And we would keep at it until we see the thing materialize or the thing happen. And let me tell you something, that's not easy. And if you're struggling with it like I do, I want to encourage you to do something that I've begun to do. And that's to ask God to grip me with the thing and give me the strength to stay with it so that I can actually see the outcome. Imagine if all of us did that. Imagine the things that we would get to see. But even greater than that, imagine if we did that together. Not just on our own, but imagine if we got together with other people on a regular basis, together. Said, God, we're not going to give up. We're going to camp out on this thing because we believe that this is your will. And we're going to pray for this person until we see you able to break through in their life. Imagine if we did that together as small groups. Listen to this, and this is the final quote that I will leave you with. This is from Sir John Polkinghorne, an eminent British physicist and an Anglican clergyman. This is from an interview that Dwight Nelson did with him at the Pioneer Memorial Church some time ago. This is what he says. I think of group praying functioning as a laser beam. A single strand of light by itself is diminished in power. But when multiple strands of light are band together, as in a laser beam, then there is no obstacle that such a focused band of light cannot penetrate. Imagine if we did this together. 6:30, Monday night. I am in faith making a statement that I and some other people are going to be over in the Better Living Center for 1 week for 1 hour a night, 6:30 to 7:30. Joining together to ask God to do God-sized things in us, in our families, in this church, and through us into the community. Can you imagine if more of us join together and do that? And if after that week is over, we just don't give up. If we keep praying. I'm looking forward to the outcome. And I hope you are too. You're going to be blessed now by a final musical number from the Orange Hill